And I think we see that conspiring together coming to the front in Ezekiel 38. That's the trap. That's the trap that we have, is that that's going to eventually spring on Israel.
I've told people in Israel that this Abraham Accords thing may be a trap because when I
This is Bible teacher Nelson Walters, and today we have a very exciting discussion for you with my friends John Haller and Sam Fulcher. And we're going to talk about the Abraham Accords, the peaceful Abraham Accords. And are they really Israel's greatest end time threat? Are they going to backfire? Are they really a trap instead of something good? You know, certainly Trump doesn't think that. Actually, Israel doesn't think that. But just maybe, the Muslim countries do think that. So we're going to talk about them. And personally, I have a problem with the name Abraham Accords, just the name, because I think it's a misnomer. One of you guys want to jump in and talk about why Abraham Accords might be a misnomer?
well, I'd like to hear your reason.
Well, because Isaac is the child of promise, and the Abraham covenant was given to Israel. The Abrahamic covenant, it wasn't given to the whole region, and actually, it's very, very possible that if they tie these Abraham Accords into a two-state solution, or hang on to your seats, folks, into an 8-state solution or an 11-state solution, because we'll probably talk about that a little bit today. It's actually an undoing of the Abrahamic covenant, which is something, of course, God hates because God has promised that, and he doesn't want to be shown to be a liar. So I just have this feeling that Abraham Accords are just a misnomer, because Abrahamic covenant was given to one country, not to this whole group. And although they are children of Abraham in a physical sense, we also know from the Bible that you can be a physical child of Abraham and not a spiritual child of Abraham. So for many reasons, I just have problems with that name. But
specifically in Genesis 17, the promise of the everlasting covenant of the land of Canaan was given specifically to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so the inheritance of that land does not go down through Ishmael. It goes to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that's repeated verbatim in 1 Chronicles 16 and Psalm 105. So I agree with you that it's a misnomer. It doesn't do justice to what the scripture says that promise was to, which was to Abraham and his descendants through Isaac and Jacob.
So I agree with you. I mean, and it's interesting um, the language that's being used and people that are talking about it. I know we'll talk about the Abraham Shield, the Coalition for Regional Security Organization that sort of emerged earlier this year and has now come back more prominently. And when I'm looking at the billboards that were put up in Israel by the AbrahamShield.org people, when they're in Hebrew, um, and one of the signs in Tel Aviv, when you translate the Hebrew, it says, "Time for war. Let's settle it. Now it's time for Kiryat Avraham," which means the covenant. Now it's time for the covenant of Abraham. So I think it's very. I mentioned this recently in an update that I did at church, that when secular people start using the terminology of Bible prophecy, that's sort of an indicator, I think, that we're at a very unique time. And so here you see them in the context of these Abraham Accords, at least on the Israeli side, this organization of people is pushing for it's time for the covenant of Abraham. And I just find all of that interesting in the timing with everything else that's going on.
Which brings us to a little bit, I think, but that's great, by the way. And I don't know if people, we've had the picture of that up on the screen, and maybe I'll put it back up again for that billboard that has 10 kings plus Netanyahu and Trump, 10 national leaders, which I think a lot of people, little light bulbs go off in people's minds when they see that, and which it should. And I just think that a lot of people are beginning to see this possibly as a fulfillment of Daniel 9:27. And what we're going to do today is we're sort of organizing our talk by scriptural passages. So we got Daniel 9:27. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Psalm 83. We're going to talk about Ezekiel 38, which is the Gog of Magog passage, and some things about that. We're going to talk about Joel chapter 3, which talks about the dividing of the land. And we're also going to talk about Isaiah 28, which is the covenant with death that Israel is going to make in the end time. So that's sort of like an outline of where we're going to go if you're following along. First one is Daniel 9:27. For people who follow the Nelson Walters channel, we've talked extensively about that verse. People are always looking for someone who is going to make a covenant with Israel. But it's very important to know that that is a mistranslation of the actual verse that says that he will cause, not just make himself, but cause to strengthen a covenant with the many. So it's not a making of the covenant, but it is a strengthening of a pre-existing covenant. So, and that's what takes place over a period of 7 years. So those are important things to know about Daniel 9:27, because we start throwing out the word covenant, and I know that's where everybody's mind is going. You want to, one of you guys want to talk about Psalm 83 and how we recently saw some discussion about not a 2-state solution, but maybe a 8-state solution or an 11-state solution?
Well, I'll start off. So I've become increasingly convinced of views that I've seen expressed by some people, at least of considering them very serious talkers about it, that when you look at Psalm 83, it's always been controversial. A lot of people say, oh, Psalm 83 was fulfilled in 1948. It was fulfilled in 1967. And I don't think it was. Sometimes it's a little difficult on these prophecies that things get, some of them are recapitulated, some of them are fulfilled more precisely as we go on. They're fulfilled, multiple times. And so it's a little bit difficult to sort through those, which ones are multiple fulfillments, which ones have been fulfilled and are completely finished and done with. But if you look at Psalm 83, it is the countries in the near environs of Israel, and there's 10 of them, 10 people groups that are identified. And when you look at these posters that recently appeared in Tel Aviv, there's a very close, it's not an exact correlation, but there's a very close correlation with that. And there's even talk, the one that seems to be missing is Assyria, which I would put in the area of Iraq. But then you see people start talking about it, and they're actually talking about Iraq joining into this thing. Now, that one's got some logistical issues with the, I think, still Iranian influence, but the Iranian influence, I think we can agree, has changed dramatically since 6, 7, 8 months ago. I mean, it's been stunning what's happened.
Yeah, actually, Iran had put all of their power into the proxies, so they didn't actually have to fight a war directly. And now those proxies have pretty much been diffused. You got Gaza diffused, you got Hezbollah diffused, Iraq isn't going anywhere. Even the Yemenis are diffused. Iran has lost a lot of its teeth, and that's just something to think about. Now, when I look at who those 10 nations are, um, I tried to put them in kind of modern terms, and I wrote them down. We got Gaza, we got Hezbollah, we've got three areas in Jordan, uh, Moab, Ammon, and Edom. We've got an area of Hebron, we've got Saudi Arabia, we've got Judea and Samaria, and you said Iraq. It when you're talking about Assyria, you could also be, it also bleeds over into Syria, so you could have them. So that's sort of a ring of fire all the way around Israel.
The
I was,
one
I was
that's
just going to say that, interestingly, it appears Egypt is missing.
Well, you can put Egypt in there, Sam, depending on how you define those people groups, because those people groups are pretty difficult to determine exactly who they are. Um, there is one,
Hagrites, Hagar.
Hagar, yeah, 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 yeah. So there are the Hagarites, and after Hagar, and so that you could call that Egypt. It's a
I
little
think
hard. I think there's a
I
lot
don't
of
think that's a push to call that Egypt. And then in verse 7 of 83 you have Gebal. And there's some indicate, is that like in northern Lebanon, Syria area, or is it Saudi Arabia? I sort of lean towards the Saudi Arabia side of that.
Yeah, you have Ishmaelites, which you could call Saudi Arabia also. So,
Correct.
uh, it's a little bit dicey to say that we know that for sure what those 10 nations are. But what we can say is they surround Israel like a ring of fire. And
When the Antichrist invades in Daniel 11, and he overtakes the hidden things of Egypt, um, to me that would place them out of the beast alliance for Egypt to be have its resources taken by that. I agree that the Hagarites could be viewed as Egyptians, but I've also seen where their placement in the geography of the land was not necessarily in Egypt, but more in Gilead or Upper Samaria. So it's not clear to me for sure that the Hagarites are Egyptians, although I wouldn't argue it. It's just an observation that when Antichrist does invade, he does take the hidden things of Egypt, which
What
would seem to.
Look, and I also think it's interesting that if we look at it in terms of the contemporary what's going on in the world right now, Nelson, you mentioned that Israel had completely, it seems to have dismantled Hezbollah to the extent that Hezbollah was recently discussing, and the Lebanese government was discussing about disarming Hezbollah, that they were going to turn in their weapons. That doesn't mean their influence is gone, but that's a very interesting development. And then it also talks about the Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre. And when we were talking about this, some of us a year ago, everybody said, well, you're crazy because Lebanon's controlled by Hezbollah, which is this mortal enemy of Israel, and Gaza is controlled by Hamas. And just look at how the landscape has changed in the last 8 months in that regard. And now Lebanon is talking about coming into this. Will some new government come in place in Gaza? That's a very fluid situation there. And then you have Syria, which you mentioned could be considered part of this group, talking about normalizing things with Israel, and that 8. Let's see, this is July when we're recording this, so 8 months ago, people would have said you are out of your mind if you think Syria is going to come into any kind of arrangement with Israel. But now the U.S. ambassadors over there, they lifted the sanctions on a guy who was 10 months ago, a wanted terrorist with a $10 million bounty on his head. This is, you know, it's what I've said a lot, and I don't want to completely take over the thing, but these things in Bible prophecy, they happen gradually, then suddenly.
Yes,
And
agreed 100%.
And we're in the suddenly part, and so I think things change very, very quickly.
And in all of our discussion today, and I think our listeners need to listen to this very closely, is that what you think you see now may not be what you see in 5 months. Things can change again. Just because it went gradually and then suddenly doesn't mean that there's not going to be another suddenly part where things happen that we have nothing, we just cannot expect. And we'll say, did we just see that? Is this believable? Is this really what's going on? So I think we have to be very careful to think we know it all when we're talking about this.
Something that, now that you bring that up, I mean, it just came out today that the ultra-Orthodox parties are very unhappy with the draft law that Israel is trying to impose. And of course, they are a major part of Netanyahu's coalition. And if they withdraw from the coalition, it could bring Israel to elections, which would introduce a government that may be more amenable to an agreement. So that could happen suddenly as well. But
well,
that's
Sam, let
something
me
to
ask
keep
you
an
this
eye on.
questions. So I'm watching the landscape, and the Abraham Shield group, the Coalition for Regional Security. It's always interesting. And again, they're using prophetic terms in their titles, in their documents, and that type of thing. And so it was last week, as the dispute over whether the Haredi are going to be forced into being drafted, and so the Abraham Shield thing came out in January, and there was a flurry of activity about it, but then it was quiet, and now all of a sudden it comes. And I think looking at the Abraham Shield organization and knowing some of those people and having interviewed them, they're committed. This whole document that they're talking about is they call it Hamastan. They talk about a technocratic solution, but they're firmly committed. I know these people. They're committed to a two-state solution.
Yes. That's actually their whole. They think when they get the two-state solution, they'll have peace and security, just like it says in Thessalonians, 1 Thessalonians 5. So they are and I looked at that document too that they put out, John, and the Arabs are doing nothing. The whole thing is slanted toward what Israel's going to do and provide in order to get peace.
But what they're trying to do is they're trying to build on the Abraham Accords. And now, of course, you have Netanyahu having made his third visit to Washington in just the first 7 months of the Trump administration, which is extremely unusual. And Trump pushing the Abraham Accords, and the Saudis seeming to be on board with it to a point, which I think is very significant as well. I'm just saying that, and I don't know that the revival, the billboards and everything appeared around the time that this dispute was coming to a head with the Haredi being in the draft and challenges to Netanyahu's coalition. And so they're trying to, I've said this a number of times. In fact, I titled my update yesterday, Wars, Rumors of Wars, and Wars of Rumors. And so everybody is trying to control the narrative and get out ahead of it for geopolitical reasons, which is an interesting development.
But I love that wars of rumors, because we've got lots of that. Speaking of which, I'll add one to that. You were talking about Trump. I am not 100% convinced that the United States did not strike a deal with Netanyahu. And that part of that deal was, we'll take out Iran for you, get rid of your greatest enemy, then you get to the table and we divide the land. I think Trump wants that as his living legacy. Um, I think he wants to go down as the greatest peacemaker of all time, solve the Middle East crisis. He's wanted that from his first term. And I think that was that was a big step for the United States to do that. I mean, it was a massive step, a giant risk to incite what could be World War III. And he did that, though, to get, I think, Netanyahu to the table and say, look, you owe me now. You owe me, buddy. This is what I did for you. Now you got to do this for me.
You mean so Trump would actually strong arm somebody in a negotiation?
Yeah, I think he might do that. John sent me a very, very interesting video by a guy named Mordecai Kedar. And his idea was that we don't need a 2-state solution. We actually need an 8-state solution. And that there's a whole bunch of small sheikdoms or sheikdoms that make up the Palestinian area, and that they don't really get along that well. And it would be a very difficult thing to actually have a 2-state solution. But rather, his recommendation was having an emirate type system, like the United Arab Emirates, where you have a whole bunch of little states, little towns that all have their own sheiks and are independent, but yet are combined in a in like a federation of some sort. You want to speak to that, John?
Sure. Dr. Kedar is probably the leading Islamic Arabic expert in Israel today. He is a treasure. He is incredibly knowledgeable. He speaks fluent Arabic. He is the one, aside from his the Emirati plan that he's come up with for maybe making some kind of resolution to this problem, that he was also the one from whom I learned that the night journey of Muhammad that is now tied to Al-Aqsa Mosque is historically unsupported. And this has even been published in Saudi newspapers, that it was not from Al-Aqsa Mosque that Muhammad made his night journey. It was actually from a near mosque to Mecca. And so the whole false narrative of the Temple Mount being a Muslim holy site because of Muhammad's night journey is completely false. So he has studied Arab culture, and I'm hardly an expert, but I have been through the Judea, Samaria, which is called the West Bank. And I've talked to Arabic people there. And again, I'm not an expert, but I do know that there are different clans, factions, groups in, if you will, these sheikdoms in the area. I'll call it the West Bank, just so we know we're talking about the Arabic areas. And they don't like each other. The Sheikh of Hebron, which came out recently in a big article on the Wall Street Journal, and said, we want to leave the Palestinian Authority. We want to enter the Abraham Accords. We want to make peace with Israel. He's doing this at great risk to his life. I mean, the area of Hebron, there where two important several biblical sites are, where David ruled for 7 years, the tomb of the patriarchs, Machpelah, and then Mamre, where Abraham had gotten the promise in Genesis 18. In that area, it is extremely volatile. There's a lot of terror cells and that type of thing, but the clans rule. So there might be 5 clans within the Hebron area that would be under the control or submit to this sheik. So this sheik coming out, this is a very big deal. I mean, Hebron's a populous city in Israel. So he's proposing that he wants to leave the Abraham, he wants to enter the Abraham Accords and leave the Palestinian Authority. These clans are very divided. The Arabic society is very tribal. And so Mordecai Mordecai Kedar said, look, let's use this, and let's do something like United Arab Emirates.
So if we talk about Psalm 83 and kind of tie a bow around that before we move on, in Psalm 83, we have 10 people groups. They are said to be of one mind. The other place where that's said is of the 10 kings in the book of Revelation, who are also of one mind, and eventually give their power and authority to the beast. So maybe we're talking about the formation of the 10 kings initially. You know, a lot of people think that the 10 kings are going to be just the entire beast empire, but maybe it's just where he starts. We're to be watching for the formation of those 10 kings. Irenaeus, back in the 2nd century, said that we are not even to consider calculating the mark of the beast until the 10 kings form. That's really our sign that we're getting ready for the beast to come. So very important, you know, for us to just have a sense of what is going on there now as we might be watching this form. So let's go to another topic.
Joel 3 says they divided the land. So
yeah.
That actually means something.
It sure does. And Jesus, it appears that that's the same event that takes place when Jesus does the sheep and goat judgment, where he gathers all the nations together and he begins to judge them at that point.
Right.
So that's a really important aspect that you know, in the scope of what Jesus is doing, he is judging the nations for dividing the land. I wish Trump had better spiritual advisors that could maybe help him out a little bit and tell him that that might not be the best.
And we know it's going to happen. It's just that we don't want our guy to be the one to do it.
I know.
I just think at some point we need to have a discussion on what it means to divide the land, because you hear people say, well, the land's always been divided, or it's divided right now. But the reality is that land, ever since the 6-Day War, has been in dispute. It's not been determined its final status. That's supposed to happen out of the Oslo Accords, where decide which country this is going to be a part of. So my consideration is that the division of the land is when the world deeds that land to Edom or to the Arab side, to Ishmael's offspring, when it's officially deeded, because once that's done, if you think about it from the world's point of view, that'll never change for the rest of history. So it's not just that you've got Jews and Arabs living in Judea and Samaria, that Israel doesn't have full control over at this point. It's when they deed that land over to the other side. That's what I consider to be division of the land. And I think that maybe this Abraham Shield event, I'm curious to see what form of a nation that will take if those guys band together like the United Arab Emirates. But this will be sanctioned by the UN, in my opinion, and couched in the language of peace and security.
Yes, and there's a UN conference, just so everybody can just get their calendars and circle these days so that you know this is coming up. There's a UN conference like there was last year in September. It's September 23rd to the 29th. Go ahead, highlight that in your little online calendars, or if you got one on the wall like I still do, you can just mark that off, that there's a UN conference coming up, because I think something big is going to happen at that time.
Well,
John?
Nelson, if I could just say, I'm looking at a Guardian article in the Guardian from a couple days ago, and they note that this is a very big meeting. It's about the two-state solution. Part of this process is the ceasefire that we think Trump is trying to shove down Netanyahu's throat on Gaza.
Yes.
So
yes.
If you get that, the two-state solution might follow very quickly. And we can talk about it. This is not going to happen. Again, it's this gradually then suddenly thing, and it can happen literally overnight, right in front of our eyes.
Absolutely, and we shouldn't be expecting this this gradual to just always be gradual. That's the, you know, where people say, well, we don't have enough time for that to happen. Oh, yes, we do.
And on top of it, Lebanon is talking about normalizing with Israel. Syria is talking about normalizing with Israel. And these are things that I don't think a lot of us ever really thought. Nelson, I know you and I talked, and I said I wish I had a little tip jar here for every time somebody said, well, gee, I never thought that would happen before I was out of here. If they could just, drop a 20 in every time they say that, I could retire, have a much more comfortable retirement than I do, because we all do it. I mean, we all say, gee, I never thought I would see that happen, but it did.
The meeting that Nelson tried to attend in New York, that's been changed to the 28th and 29th of July. And some people anticipate that France is going to officially recognize Palestine as a nation. There are 193 nations, and already 140 have extended that recognition. So you're approaching 80% of the countries of the world have done that. So the momentum is building, and I anticipate that we'll see several more countries do that. And as that momentum builds, the pressure is just going to become enormous to divide that land.
But we haven't talked about the trap part yet. We haven't talked about it backfiring on Israel. One of the things when we talked about Psalm 83 that we did not mention was that the nations that form that 10 people group, they behind the scenes want to erase Israel from the map. These groups are going to be behind the scenes in their minds, still very against Israel. Even if they sign the Abraham Accords, doesn't mean that behind the scenes they aren't conspiring together. And I think we see that conspiring together coming to the front in Ezekiel 38. A lot of people are thinking that Ezekiel 38 could happen very, very soon. I think that's not true. There's a couple things that have to be in place first. First thing is that Israel has to essentially be a nation of unwalled villages. They have to be at peace, and basically you cannot say that that's true today. So Ezekiel 38 could not happen today. And the second thing is that Iran has to be not only an ally of Turkey, because, and we're going to talk about Turkey a little bit. I think, and I don't know if you believe this or not, John. I shouldn't speak for you. My belief is that Gog of Magog is a Turk. The ancient Assyrian court records show that Magog was located in Turkey, not in Russia. I guess a lot of people could say, oh yeah, well they were there at the time of the Assyrians, but then they migrated up to Russia. But I'm not a believer in that. I believe that it's the landmass that they were talking about, not just the people. And I think Gog and Magog's Turk. And if that's true, not only would Iran be their ally, Iran would be subservient to them, because Gog and Magog's leading the show. So how could a Shia Muslim nation become subservient to a Sunni Muslim leader? So there's a lot to think about there about how that happens. We don't have to get into all of that, but there is an element there where Iran has to join the show. And I think what just happened to them has greatly weakened them and will make that a lot more possible. So those are the two things.
Well, can I just make a few comments about Turkey, because
please do.
I've followed Turkey for a long time. I've relayed the story many times. I was at a prophecy conference. I got invited over to the speaker's dinner after the conference, and so I was sitting at a table with Chuck Missler and Bill Koenig, and I asked Chuck, I said, so do you get excited when, and this is like 16, 17 years ago. And I said, do you get excited when you see all these things happening? And he goes, yeah, but John, I'm watching Turkey. And when I see Turkey start to change, then I'm going to get really excited. So I often wonder, Chuck's gone to be with the Lord, but I often wonder, like, what would he say if we were around looking at Turkey? So I followed Turkey. So let me make a few comments. Uh, I'll try to limit them to three. Back in 2017, when Trump moved the embassy, U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, Erdogan immediately gathered all the 57 Islamic countries for a confab in Istanbul. And during that, we always talk about Ezekiel 38, 39. We have our little maps and everything. He put up an Ezekiel 38, 39 map. And I'm not sure why all of us Bible prophecy guys don't use his map. It was in his newspaper. It's still online. There's actually an interactive um, map that they put up in like the ArcGIS system that you can access, and it shows all the nations coming against Jerusalem. I mean, they all draw a line to Jerusalem from the Muslim countries all over the world. So that's one. Number two, back in January, his son had a conference or a protest in support of Palestine, as support of the Gaza, the Palestinian aspect of the Gaza war. And it was called A Sun Rises. It was kind of an interesting play on words because it was led by Erdogan's son. And the title of the thing was A Sun, S-U-N, Rises. But in the poster for that, it had three things. One was an image of Hagia Sophia. The middle one was an image of a tower at the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus. And then the final one was the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. And above that, it was yesterday, Hagia Sophia, the largest church in Christendom, was turned into a mosque by Erdogan 5 years ago. That was way more than symbolic. Second, Damascus. This poster came out in December, right after the fall of Damascus. So it said yesterday Hagia Sophia, today Damascus. The Umayyad Mosque in Damascus was the most important mosque of the Umayyad dynasty out of Persia back in the 800s. It dominated a large part of the world, known world at that time. And then third is tomorrow Al-Aqsa, meaning tomorrow the Dome of the Rock, the Temple Mount, Jerusalem, and the Jews. He laid out his plan. Now, just this past, on July 12th, Erdogan gave an important speech. I don't know if it was in Istanbul. You can get it online. I actually got it and ran it through AI to translate it and everything. And essentially, what happened, this is another one of these suddenly then gradually things. The Kurds and the Turks have been fighting each other for decades. Suddenly, last week, there was the Kurds they announced they were going to make peace, and they came in a ceremony and they burned their weapons. Erdogan then gets up and gives this speech about now our terrorism is over. We are united as a great country, and we are uniting Turks, Kurds, and Arabs in this final push. And he mentioned Jerusalem and Gaza and everything in it. I think this was an incredibly important speech. I don't know if you guys think that, but it just was like, I have to talk about this because I think it's that important, because Turkey is very important. We know for a fact that it's part of Ezekiel 38.
It's interesting that the new leader of Syria is a Turkish proxy, and now that he's in charge, he now has just open highway right to the northern border. I think that's significant, in addition to what you just alluded to, John, that he's united the Kurds and the Arabs and the Turks in this alliance that is now taking them right up to the border. And, as far as Persia or Iran being subservient, I think, we knew that from Ezekiel 38 because Persia was a follower, it wasn't the leader. and
Hmm.
it needed to be taken down a notch. Um, but when this alliance happens, chasms of difference between Shia and Sunni are not going to go away. They may paper them over, but in there you can see the fissures between these groups that will lead to them destroying each other, because it says in Ezekiel 39 and Zechariah 14 that the mechanism of destruction of these armies is that the hand of one will be lifted against the hand of another, just as it was in the alliance in the days of the king of Judah, when an alliance came against them, and because of internal division, they ended up destroying each other.
So let's talk about timing of when Ezekiel 38 timing is probably, if you have to say the rapture timing is the most controversial thing that we have in the church today, timing of Ezekiel 38 is probably, maybe the second most controversial thing. A lot of people look at it as a pre-tribulational event. I would say that's the majority opinion. I'm going to put out another idea here. If you look at what Jesus says about when the invasion of Jerusalem happens, in Luke 21, verses 20 through 24, Jesus says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, know that her desolation is near. Not happened yet, but near. So, it appears, and that verse in Luke is directly uh, parallel to the one in Matthew 24, where the abomination of desolation takes place. So that puts the surrounding of Jerusalem with armies at the same point as, uh, just slightly before the abomination of desolation. So when is that? It's a midpoint event. So we really should be looking for this to happen. In other words, behind the scenes, because of Psalm 83, there is this anti-Jewish sentiment, and nobody's talking about Turkey joining the Abraham Accords. So they're those fringe players that are in Ezekiel 38. Iran not joining Abraham Accord. Turkey not joining Abraham Accord. You look down, you see Libya and Sudan also in the Ezekiel 38 alliance, not joining the Abraham Accords. And then you have that inner group. And it appears, it says many nations are with them. So who are these many nations? Maybe those are the Abraham Accords, but it seems to come from the outside in. And it appears to seem, at least to me, to happen or begin at the midpoint and then end at the return of Jesus later in the tribulation. So that's sort of the timing aspect of Ezekiel 38, but that's the trap. That's the trap that we have, is that's going to eventually spring on Israel. And that map that we put up, that John talked about, is going to become a reality. Africa, Middle East, Central Asia, all those places all coming against Israel. They won't be able to hold off.
It boggles my mind that it's kind of been missed by a lot of us. It's not talked about more, when it's sort of like it plays right into everything that we talk about. I want to make one other point. We talk about the Temple Mount, and whether that's a rebuilt temple or not. I know you guys have talked a lot about that. Certainly, we're seeing things towards starting the sacrificial system and trying to rebuild the temple. But it does talk about in Daniel that he will cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease.
Mm.
And it appears that there's an interesting verse that somebody turned me on to in Isaiah chapter 63. It says, "Your holy people possessed your sanctuary for a little while. Our adversaries have trodden it down."
Oh, amazing verse. Yeah, I'll have to look that one up.
I mean, it's kind of an amazing, like, wait a minute, maybe this is just because, these prophecy passages are all kind of jammed together and then they've got to kind of be broken apart. But it's Isaiah 63:18. Your holy people possessed your sanctuary for a little while. It's interesting. They're referred to as holy, set aside people. It talks about your sanctuary and it mentions a little while. And then we have this thing in Daniel where he will cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease.
Yes.
And they all seem to fit together.
Yeah, I'll read that passage out of Isaiah because I got the Bible right here. Why, O Lord, do you cause us to stray from your ways and harden our hearts from fearing you? Return. So they're calling for the return. For the sake of your servants, the tribes of your heritage. Your holy people possessed your sanctuary for a little while. Our adversaries have trodden it down. We have become like those over whom you have never ruled. So that's the end of the chapter 63. So it goes from 17 down to 19.
When you're reading that, what I'm hearing in my head are echoes of Hosea chapter 5 and 6, where they talk about, in our affliction they seek me earnestly. And I've not thought this till we read through that just now. But when you look at that, come, let us return to Yahweh. He's turned us, but he will heal us up. Hosea 6:1. He has struck us, but he will bandage us. He will make us alive after 2 days. He will raise us up on the third day so that we may live before him. It's, as it might have been Arnold Fruchtenbaum who said, the second coming, it's like they're going to call for the Messiah to come rescue them. They're going to turn. And so now you see in Isaiah 63, it's like, yeah, we were doing all these things wrong. We only possessed your sanctuary for a little while, and we need to change. We need to repent and get back to this. And it seems like there's a synergy, I'm just suggesting, between Isaiah 63, the last part of it, and Hosea 5:15 through 6:3.
And the end of Matthew 23, where Jesus says, your house is left to you desolate until you will not see me again, until you cry out, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.
That is tied in together. I have no doubt about that.
Yeah, all the same crying out at the end.
Look, this, we talk about this sometimes in sort of almost a detached scientific method way, but it's like the stuff is happening right in front of our eyes with these guys using biblical, prophetic terminology, language, descriptors, geopolitics, and everything. So maybe we have to pay attention to it. I'm concerned when I see the economic component of the Abraham Accords touted and bandied about by everybody under the sun. Look, we want people to be successful. We want them to have good lives and everything. But there's a trap side to this.
Frightening thing. But I want to leave our listeners with a very important thought. And I mentioned it in another video, and I'm just going to mention it again. You say, Nelson, you're talking about crazy talk here, and it's making me scared. And when Joshua was ready to go into the promised land, God said to him, be strong and courageous. And you might be saying to me, Nelson, I hear that and I feel scared. I don't feel strong. I don't feel courageous. And what my point was in that other video was, God didn't say feel. He didn't say feel strong and courageous. He said, be strong and courageous. Trust in me, and you will be strong. You will act strong. You will do the right things when the time comes. Don't worry about how you feel. It's normal to feel frightened. Look at how Jesus felt in Gethsemane. and he asked God, if this is possible, take this cup from me. But God had a plan, and Jesus was empowered, and he did what had to be done. So it's be strong and courageous, not feel strong and courageous. So I just wanted to leave our listeners with that important thought.